Okay, welcome back to another episode of Career Bound by Praxis. I'm John. This is Mitchell. Glad to be here today. Excited to talk through what we got on the agenda. Mitchell, I'll turn it over to you. I want to hear what your thoughts are. We were talking about what the process looks like when you're first moving out, moving away from home, getting an apartment. So specifically, the whole process of leasing and figuring out, like how you're going to furnish the apartment, all that kind of stuff. So I'll turn it over to you to hear like what your initial just like take is on that. But maybe you could start out with just talking about like what the process is like in general, and then transition into maybe some stories or some specifics or something like that.
Yeah, so everybody does this at some point in their time. I know that this is a relevant issue for many of our listeners, many of our students as well. They're either in the process now, or they recently did this, or they're planning to do this on the horizon sometime in the next few months, next year or something. And so at some point in time, everybody's got to cut the cord. They got to flee the nest and go out on their own. And so that can be a daunting thing. I think, for some teens, young adults, this was me. You're eager to do that as quickly as possible. Others, I think that it's a little bit more intimidating, and that intimidation, that fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, all of the things that you haven't quite figured out, that can create this sort of mental hurdle that you have to overcome in order to go do this. And that's really the purpose of this episode. Is we want to break down some of the common things and really give you a checklist of items that if you at least go through this, you're going to be at least mentally prepared to make this, even if you're not quite financially prepared or in a position where you can do that today. At least you have a roadmap for how to get where you want to go. So first things first, that you are going to move out. You're going to move out on your own for the first time, and you are beginning the process of trying to find that place, trying to gain independence. So there's a couple criteria here that I'll throw out to qualify this. So you're either moving out for the first time, but you plan to stay in the same city. Maybe you're moving across town. That's a little bit different than the advice. There's some extra things that I would layer in. If you are moving out on your own for the first time, but you're moving to a place that you don't know. So like maybe you're moving to a different city. You landed a job, you're relocating for a job, you're moving out of your hometown for the first time to a new city where you don't know as many people. I would say it's a little bit different scenario, because when you're looking for your first apartment, your first rental, one of the things that I would say is it does help to be a little bit familiar with the area where you're planning to move. This kind of sets the tone for your time living in that place. So how far is your commute to and from work? What is what's the radius that you have to travel on a weekly basis? That's something that I always like to keep in mind when you're first looking at a spot. So how far is the grocery store? How far is the gym, your church, any of the other places that you're going to frequent? Just kind of understanding what the lay of the land is. If you're moving to a place across town, like you're just moving out on your own, out of your parents' house for the first time as a teenager, you're staying in the same hometown, you likely already have a pretty good idea of the lay of the land, the lay of the city. Where the places are that you frequent. The good parts of town versus the bad parts of town, the like safe parts of town versus places that you want to avoid, places where you're going to feel comfortable at night versus places where you may want to add another lock or something like that. Like those are just I've lived in a lot of different cities too, so some of those some places I've lived, I've never thought twice about it. Other places, like there are actual legitimate concerns, like San Francisco. When I lived there, for instance, like you didn't want to leave your car outside. And so you wanted to find a place where you could have, garage parking, just because like most people, sadly to say, like most people's cars were broken into in the city, like if you lived there for any matter of months. So I don't say that just tongue in cheek, like it's a small consideration. But it's a real one in some places. So anyway, that's kind of the first thing, is like start to to identify loosely an area that you want to live. It's easier if you know the city. If you're moving to a new place, this is, one thing that I'd say is if you're moving to a new city for the first time, if you already have friends there, lean on your friends. They can probably help you identify some area. If you're moving for work and you don't have a ton of friends or you don't really know anybody in a new city, I've done this a couple times too. Ask somebody from work. Talk to your manager, talk to one of your peers, see if they have any recommendations. The other thing that you can do, and I've done this before a couple of different times, is like book an Airbnb for like your first month. Try and maybe don't ship all of your stuff. Maybe don't move everything. Put what you can in your car when you move. Bring enough stuff with you to survive a month, and then give yourself, you buy yourself some time to go and get acquainted with a new area. If you're moving to a new city, if you're, obviously if you're moving across town, you already know. So that's where I would start is you begin to identify areas that you want to live. And within that area, you begin to identify the different apartments, different rental properties. And the next thing is kind of like understanding the budget. You need to understand your budget before you go into this, but understand like the actual cost of different rentals within the areas that you want to live. And so you may start by really wanting, finding a couple apartments you really like, but they may just be out of your budget. And so you have some options in that scenario where maybe you're looking for a roommate that can maybe bring something that's out of your budget by yourself back into your budget. If you've got a roommate, you're splitting up costs. Or you are, if you're staying solo, like you may just have to move farther down your list, or you may have to begin to make some difficult trade-offs. Like you may have a little bit longer commute, but you are living in a more within your means. You may have a little bit longer drive to like your grocery store or church or like any of the other places you're frequently. Like I remember. One apartment I lived in, it was like a 30-minute commute every morning. One time when I was living in Atlanta, if I didn't leave my house by like 5:45 in the morning, then I could expect like an hour and a half to 2-hour commute. And it wasn't really that far distance wise, but the traffic was just so bad in the early mornings that it was like, I'm going to go early. It kind of was a good forcing function for me at that point in my career because I went to work early as one of the first people in the office. And then I was one of the last people to leave because I wanted to build my schedule around traffic. And I knew that this commute was something that was just totally unreasonable. If I'd have ended up living there like permanently or for a longer period of time, I probably would have found a different solution to that. But
you live in a lot of places. I feel like I hear a new one every time I talk to you, and I talk to you every day. So that's wild.
Yeah, I've lived in a lot of different places. Some of those were 3 to 4 month extended stays. Some were several years at a time. And I think that that's another fun thing when you're moving out on your own, especially when you're at the start of your career. Is I think a lot of people don't understand it. I certainly didn't when I was younger. Is that you can literally just pick a place. And you don't have to feel like you're moving there permanently. You can find different cities that fit the life stage that you're in, or fit the stage of your career that you're in, and you can build your life and career for that stage in that place. For young adults, especially if you are highly ambitious, you're entrepreneurial, you want to build something, like move to some of the cities where there's tons of other young adults who are working on cool things. Cities like Austin, Texas, city like Tampa, Miami, Nashville, the greater Nashville area, Salt Lake City. To some extent, cost of living becomes a real consideration. Places like Miami, San Francisco, New York, Boston. But there's still a ton of cool stuff there. There's still, definitely strong communities of young adults, cool stuff happening in most of the major cities. Dallas is another one. Dallas, all of the major cities, one thing that you can do before you, like, let's say, give you a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say that you want to move out on your own. but you don't know where you want to live. You're just kind of like open, and you know that you want to move away from your hometown, and you don't really know how to do that. This is another thing that you could do. I did this a couple times way early on, is like just go visit some of the cities that you're interested in visiting and explore them, get to know them. If you know somebody in that city, have them like show you the best of that city. I had a friend do this for me before I moved to Charleston. Actually, is like kind of gave me the like 48-hour best the city has to offer, and I left that weekend being like, I want to live here. I ended up moving there, and it was large part because I didn't have to approach this city by myself. Like I got somebody who already knew the lay of the land, and they could sell me on all of the benefits, and it was an awesome thing. And I think that that's one of the benefits of Praxis community for students is we've got a lot of alumni living all over the place, awesome alumni who I imagine would be more than willing to do stuff like that if you're looking at a particular city and they're there. So anyway, bringing it back full circle is it kind of starts with understanding the important levers, which is like, where do you want to live geographically? So which city, and then understanding your budget. And then you begin to build this sort of framework of, okay, what do I want my life to look like? Then comes all the like brass tacks. We can get into some of those, like the actual mechanics of signing your apartment. But that's where I would start, is understanding some of those things. And, if there's other things that you have to add, let's kind of riff on that for a second and before we get into the finer details.
Yeah, I think that I'm speaking from less like of a place of experience. I've not moved far from home, and when I did move, it was like in the same town. So kind of like that one of the scenario where you're talking about like not moving far. But I do know like a lot of what you just touched on is kind of like, I think one thing I would take away from what you said, or like extrapolate from what you said, is that you don't have to make like some big jump and like do it blindly. Like you can move, like you said, go there for a month and like get an Airbnb, or or even if it's a weekend, like, or like a long weekend, like, or 5 days or something like that. Like, you can go do that, and like that way you can like make an informed decision, and you don't have, nobody's forcing you to move in general. Like if you're moving because you want to, just go do it, and like do it in a way that gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility. So I thought that was good. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear like how you would, let's say I was like, okay, Mitchell, I want to move to, I found the city I want to move to. Now I need to find a place to live. Like, what should I be on the lookout for? What's my checklist? Like, how do I know what a good apartment is? What are some like maybe tricks that somebody might throw at me that I might not, or not somebody, but a landlord or an apartment complex? Like, how do I look for stuff? Like, I had sent you a house one time that I was looking at, and I was like, man, this looks pretty cool. And then you showed me like all these different things that I wasn't even thinking of. So like, I was like, yeah, I'm really glad that Mitchell pointed that out, because I wouldn't have thought of those things. So like, what are some things like that in the process that you would go through?
Yeah, so I'm gonna keep this focused on renting versus buying.
Yeah.
I think there's totally different checklists, and for most of our listeners, most young adults, like that's going to be the lens they're looking through. Is I'm looking at my first rental, my first apartment or house, but I'm going to split it with a couple other roommates. So I think understanding your budget is the starting point before you even go, because you want to be honest with yourself. And I think that if you get really, really firm with your numbers, that will allow you to not put yourself in a bind. That'll allow you to understand the trade-offs that you may have to make for some of the other things like proximity or commute time or things like that. So understand if like roommates are an option for you. So are you open to a roommate? Are you not? Because that's going to directly impact your budget as well. Do you already have an existing line, roster of potential roommates, or are you going to have to do something like Craigslist? Because that obviously introduces a little bit of risk. You never know who you're going to get stuck with. A year lease is a long time with a stranger. If you get stuck with somebody terrible. Like I remember, early on, I moved to a new city. I was just doing an Airbnb to get my bearings. I did it Airbnb, I think, for like 6 weeks, and I was renting a room in a house with a bunch of other people, and totally uncomfortable for me. Like I like to have my own space, but like everybody that I was rooming with had a totally different schedule than me. Like I was up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, heading to the office, coming home like 6, 7 p.m. Gonna eat dinner, and I'm gonna like wind down and repeat the day. And the people that I lived with worked the opposite side of the clock. So they were working at night, or there were some people that were working at night, and then they were like up all day. But there were some people that, couple people in the house that like they were partying all night in the house. It was like loud music, throwing parties, and it was like I've got a limited amount of time to sleep here, and it was frustrating. But made you do what you can to make do. It was a lesson that I learned. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna like at this stage of my life and career, I'm not going to just kind of like spin the roulette wheel on roommates. I'm gonna make sure that like that was a non-negotiable for me. I was either going to room with somebody that I knew that I had high confidence it was going to be a good situation, or I was going to like find a studio, something cheaper, smaller, even if that meant that my commute time was higher, where I could have my own space and privacy and I wasn't going to be as disrupted. So that's something that I think, like when I was in college, I had, over the course of 4 years that I was there, I probably lived with like 20 different people over the course of 4 years. So I got a lot of experience living with roommates. I think that can be a really informative experience too. It's just like the different personality types, things that bug you, things that begin to erode your quality of life. Like you become after you do that enough times, like you become a little bit more attuned to what you're willing to tolerate versus what you're not. So anyway, I think it's worth understanding whether you're open to having roommates, you actually have somebody that and have high confidence you're going to jive well together or not, and understand that as a function of your budget before you begin to go out and find places, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're not really totally sure what your budget is, but you think you have a rough ballpark, and then you find a place that you really like and it's a little bit beyond what you think your budget is, but you talk yourself into signing a lease on this place, even though you don't have all the finer details worked out. Like I've seen people do that before, and it's not a good situation. Like you're stressed. You've created a bigger hurdle for yourself because you're stressed about just, making ends meet.
Yeah.
So don't do that. Like worst case scenario, find a cheaper place that's farther away, even if your commute time's higher and early on in your life and career, that's fine. Like you want to be more sensitive about your financial situation. So, all right, all that out of the way, let's talk about some of the things. So however you go about finding apartments, whether you're hitting like Zillow or apartments.com or you're calling a real estate agent or whatever, start to build that list of apartments and go tour as many of them as you can. And get applications when you go any of the places that you like. Understand what the application process is, understand any of the fees, understand what their policies are. So, most places they're going to have a security deposit. A lot of them, a lot of apartments are going to do like a first month, last month's rent. So you want to factor that into your budget as well. Like you should not be leasing an apartment. Do not put yourself in this situation if you don't have 4 to 6 months of rent, and you can get by with less than that. But again, I'm probably more conservative on this, but you should want to have a buffer, especially if before you even pay your first month's rent, you're going to be giving them a first and last month's rent plus the actual rent. So you're now out of pocket like 3 months rent. Don't put yourself, if it's first and last months, you're out 2 months rent, but don't put yourself in a bad financial position just to sign a lease. So, some places it'll be like, smaller security deposit plus your first month's rent. Like just understand what that is. If you have pets, you already like I had a pet, I had a dog, and I love my dog. I loved my dog. She traveled all over the country with me, and there were a couple different phases of my career where like my dog went and lived with grandma and grandpa for a while because with my parents for a while because it just wasn't feasible. I would say like if you don't have a pet, like you're moving to a new city or planning to move out on your own, like don't go get a pet. It's just going to make everything. It's going to cut half your options out, if not more, immediately. A lot of apartments or houses in particular, they're going to have either a no pet policy or it's going to cost more. So they either have like a pet fee, so non-refundable. This is the amount you pay just to have a pet, and a lot of places will have like a pet fee and a pet like pet rent. So a monthly amount you pay on top of your rent just for having a pet. Some people it's a pet deposit versus a fee. So, if your pet doesn't tear anything up, doesn't stain the carpet, like you'll get that back at the end. But understand what those costs are. As you're going through and touring these places, building out a list of, all of the places you like, you understand the security deposit, pet rent, anything like that. Ask for utilities data if they have that. You want to understand what your monthly utilities are, or whether those are included in part of the rent, or whether that's something on top of rent that you're going to be paying. For a lot of apartments, what's going to happen is they will add that to your rent, and you just pay one place. Like they handle the utilities. For a lot of places, like especially if you're renting a house, you're going to have to go hook up utilities, so water, electric, gas in some places. There may also be trash fee. Like you want to understand what all those fees are, what you're responsible for, what you have to do to activate those things, because that could be a hassle. Most places are also going to require renter's insurance. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. I think most renter insurance policies, like you're talking about like anywhere from like 10 to 20, $30 per month. Nothing crazy, but like on top of utilities, on top of rent, like this stuff can start to stack up. Do you want to understand if there's parking, if there is parking on site, if there's a parking garage, or like if it's apartment, is there a lot that I have a parking pass, that I have a reserved spot? Is there a fee to park? So a lot of apartment complexes, there's like monthly. It's either part of your rent or it may be an additional fee. I lived in a building in Denver, for instance, that we had a private parking garage, which was awesome, but it was something absurd, like $300 per month for a parking spot.
That's crazy.
And it's totally insane. I got rid of a car when I lived there because it's like, I'm not like, I can, when you factor in the cost of fuel. Oh yeah. When you factor in, if you have a car payment plus parking, plus fuel, plus car insurance, it's like, you can probably get by in a lot of places, especially if you like, where I lived in Denver, I had like everything I needed within walking distance, or a short Uber ride. So like it was a trade-off that I was willing to make just because felt like I wasn't driving a ton, but understand those things because that may impact your decision. If you got to pay, a substantial amount to have a parking spot, or is there like access to, parking that's free, but maybe you have to walk a little bit farther. On top of this, like other things like laundry, is there in-unit laundry? Do you have your own washer dryer, or do you have a community washer dryer? Is it something that's already included? Sometimes there's community washer and dryers, but they're like coin slot machines. Want to understand that cost, or you got to go to a laundromat to do your laundry. Maybe if you're just moving across town, the same city where your parents live, maybe like you can go do laundry at your parents' house, once per week if you need to, and save a little bit of money there. But you want to understand, because all of these things end up rolling back up into your budget. You want to understand if that apartment has an application fee, what's entailed in that. So some places it'll be like say $20 or $50 just to apply to be a tenant there. Sometimes there will be an extra fee because they require a background check, or a credit check or things like that. So again, start tallying all these things up. The other thing directly impacting your budget, if you're moving into a place for the first time, a lot of times you're going to have to talk about furnishing this place, and not just the actual furniture, like, a bed, couch, a chair to sit in, a table or things like that, surfaces to eat on and do work on. You're also talking about like silverware and dishes and all of the things that you need to actually, be able to function, your pots and pans, like all of those things. You can start to really drop some coin, making this decision. And I don't say all this to be daunting. Like, the reason we're even talking about this today is I want people to be armed with information so they're aware of these things up front, not they're making this decision and then they find that they've dug themselves into a really deep pit because they weren't aware of these things out of the gates. Like, there are cost effective ways to go about this. Like, go down to Goodwill or talk to your parents, see what furniture they don't want in their house anymore. Call all your aunts and uncles, call your friends. Like, I can't tell you how many, of my siblings and myself and like extended friends, like I can't tell you how many times, like, we found a couch or a bed or like pots and pans or silverwares or things that just were like, they travel around. Like, they were in my apartment for a while and they were like ended up in a sibling's apartment or like a cousin's or things like that. So like you can address some of those things in a more cost effective way. I think if you don't get a big head about it and like feel like you gotta, go furnish all this stuff out of pocket, like, people in your circle probably want to help you. So they can, a lot of times they'll be willing to, give you some of their old stuff, to make that a little bit easier. So those are some of the big things. And that's really, I say, understand those things because that's going to directly impact your budget. You may find an apartment that the monthly rent doesn't seem too bad, but when you start factoring in the cost of furnishing it, some of these other expenses that may pop up, like, laundry, utilities, parking, like maybe that apartment that seems at face value within your budget, it may, immediately creep out of it once you factor in some of those other things. So the other thing that I'd say is this somewhat a function of your career. Like, it's a little bit difficult to sign a lease if you don't have at least 12 months of your life figured out. If you're signing a year-long lease, like, have some sense of permanence, as in, you're going to be either sticking with what you're doing for the next year, or you have a way to cover your rent and manage your expenses. So you maybe have a bigger buffer of savings. You don't put yourself in a situation where you're, moving into your own place, taking on all these expenses, signing these financial obligations, and you're just kind of like, yeah, I got a job. I don't really love it right now. I may, quit my job. Like, the stake, you suddenly increase the stakes. And it may not seem like a big deal.
Yeah.
You don't pay rent, like maybe you lose your place, you can go move back in with your parents, but you're talking about like actual higher stakes here, things that can follow you around for the next few years. If you're unable to make rent, you end up getting kicked out of an apartment, evicted from an apartment, like, that's going to get added to your credit report. You want to go buy a car someday, you want to buy a house, you want to take out a, loan for anything, take out a business loan, like all those kind of things. Like, there are actual negative ramifications in situations like that. So be cognizant. Feel like you've got at least, you're in a situation where you can, kind of commit to this place and this stage of your life for the next 12 months. It doesn't mean you can't like change jobs or anything, but I wouldn't put yourself in a situation where, you're a young adult, you're in a job where you feel like you're being disrespected or whatever bad mindsets people carry into jobs with them, where you're just like, I've had it, I'm going to quit this job. And you make a rash decision where you quit a job and you don't have the next thing figured out. And suddenly, you're in a financial bind. Like, don't do that. That's kind of that sense of like, this is a good forcing function that you can do as a young adult. Is, I think it begins to extend your time horizon. You're putting more skin in the game, in the game of your life, by taking on even this year-long commitment. I think for many young adults, a lot of times that's one of the most substantial commitments that they've made, is committing to one thing for a year. Even if it's just that, I'm going to live in the same place for a year, or I'm committing to this job or this career opportunity for a year. Or this career path for a year. I think that can be a really healthy thing to do, because it shifts your time horizons. It gives you a taste of what it's like to what it's like to delay gratification. Not just like if you are unhappy, you can't, like you have a year-long lease, you got to be able to pay the rent. Like sometimes having that forcing function could be a healthy thing that begins to kind of break the conditioning of instant gratification that I think a lot of young adults in the world of social media grow up in, and it can be a good way to train yourself out of that bad tendency. So those are some of the things. Again, that is kind of a lot of topics all at once, but those are some of the things I would say you need to be aware of right out of the gates. There are probably some other details that are certainly important that I glossed over, but those are kind of the building blocks I think will get most people most of the way there.
Yeah, I feel like you covered quite a bit. Like if you think about all the, like, I think especially when you're inexperienced with something, it could be easy to forget to think about some of those finer details, like utilities, and how does the property break down utilities? Like, is it included in the rent, or is it separate? Do you have to set up internet yourself? Like, right? Is there already internet there that you're going to take over? Like, how do I, all these kinds of things. So just like having somebody or something to remind you to think of those things is really helpful. I feel like that you covered quite a bit, that if somebody was to like listen to this and they're like thinking about this, that would be really, they'd have a lot to work with there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great starting point. I think that we can probably wrap this up for now, but we will share this in an upcoming newsletter as well. But if you have additional questions, you found this topic useful, drop us a comment below, smash follow or subscribe if you want to continue to check out more content like this. We're regularly sharing advice that is aimed at being practical for the young adult, young professional just starting out in the real world. So thanks for listening if you stuck with us this long, and we'll be back again with another episode soon.